Coronavirus kiss my tail. I am attempting to do a video from the house for the first time ever. 25 years, never done this before. So let's see what happens. All right, I'm gonna pick up right here. One class got to this, the other class didn't. So I'm gonna start right here. Take the notes, like, I don't know, turn it into like a short answer question, Venn diagram, compare and contrast, maybe Vietnam and Korea. You can turn this into something that you can turn into me when we get back. All right, whatever point we start turning things in, and you can substitute that for like an assignment if you want to. I feel like me teaching it is going to help more than just doing stuff out of a book, especially for those who are planning on taking the AP test, because AP test still on May the 9th, I believe. But here we go. Enough. Taking on coronavirus. Coronavirus don't want none of us. We got a yearning, burning for learning. Here we go. All right. Let's see. So the war's going bad. All right. If you go back, you don't know where the enemy is, who the enemy is. So you spray the Agent Orange on the jungle, and that like gives people cancer, and you kill anybody sometimes. And so the Tet Offensive is showing that we're not about to win the war. So Johnson, it does end Johnson right there. Okay, he could, if we back up just a little bit, he couldn't leave. He couldn't go outside the White House without war protesters. Their favorite protest that would really drive him crazy, because he felt bad about it. He felt like he didn't have a choice. He's got these dilemmas, and a big part of it is he feels like if he's seen as a president's going to lose a war, it kills the Great Society, kills civil rights, kills voting rights. Remember the Square Deal, the New Deal was ended by World War II. The Fair Deal never got off the ground because of Korea, so he thinks the Great Society is going to be done in by the Vietnam War. So the best indictment of it is that he wasn't honest about it. All right, war protesters would say, hey, LBJ, how many kids have you killed today? And he just couldn't stand hearing that. All right, so in 1968, Democrats run against him for president, for the nomination of the Democratic Party. He's a Democrat, so there's a guy named Eugene McCarthy. This is not Joe McCarthy, the anti-communist guy. This was a very liberal guy from the Northeast, Bernie Sanders kind of figure, I guess. His name, Eugene McCarthy. He runs on an anti-war platform, and then Bobby Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, runs when Johnson. It becomes clear that Johnson's not going to win, not going to run, after Johnson announces he's not running. And it looks like Kennedy's going to win. He's got a lot of momentum, but then he gets assassinated in California by a Palestinian sympathizer. It was like, what we'd call terrorism today. Didn't have anything to do with Vietnam civil rights. It had to do with the Middle East. So then the Democrats, becomes clear they're going to nominate Hubert Humphrey, who was Johnson's vice president. And at the convention, you've got all these war protesters, and they have a permit if you're going to march, you have to have a permit from the local government. They can't tell you what the content of your march would be about, but they can tell you time, place, conditions. So they had the permit to march like a few miles away from the convention center, but they break the law and they march right outside the convention. So there's the police there to kind of keep them under control, shut down the protest. So these college kids and you didn't have to go to Vietnam if you were in college, you got a college department. These not Martin Luther King, love your enemy, turn the other cheek protesters. They're violent, and they're throwing jars of pee and poop at the police. A lot of the police are Vietnam veterans. All right, so the police go nuts, and it's a police riot, and they're just beating the crap out of the protesters. And everybody's watching it on TV, and kind of the conclusion the country reaches is time for the Republicans. With Republicans had blamed for the problems of the Depression, the Democrats are now going to be blamed kind of for the problems of the 60s. Militant civil rights, anti-war protests, the problems of the war itself. So Nixon gets elected in 68. There's an independent. George Wallace runs. He's a former Southern Democrat. He'd been the governor of Alabama during the Birmingham protests. And so he's pulling off votes from the Democrats as an independent. All right, so we got a Republican getting elected. Remember, Nixon had lost in 60 because he didn't look good on TV against Kennedy. Okay, and so you have this thing, the generation gap. The old and the young didn't like each other. The parents had been through the Great Depression and World War II. Imagine if Tom Joad gets married, has kids, and his son grows up to be a hippie. Tom Joad's not going to go for that. So if you're for the war, you were a hawk. If you're against the war, you were a dove. The hippies, or social studies term, they're called the counterculture. They're against not just the war. They see traditional American society as militarist, racist, and materialist, and they don't want any part of it. So they're gonna make love, not war, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. These are the baby boomers as teenagers. And they reject everything their parents passed on to them. The young tend to be educated, less religious, and the older tend to be religious and working class. Very much like today's divisions in a lot of ways. Anti-war folks formed their own group called SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, and they have kind of a militant wing. Called the Weathermen. The Weathermen is named after a Bob Dylan song. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. It's a Bob Dylan song, and they blew up like chemical factories where napalm's being made. But the problem is they killed janitors, on the night shift. They didn't mean to kill anybody, but they killed people. The anti-war movement becomes really, really controversial, pretty unpopular. The birth control, as far as feminism goes, birth control pills invented in 1960, so feminism's coming. And the gay rights movement is coming. The gay rights, kind of the launching event for the gay rights movement is a bar, the Stonewall, I believe it's in New York. And police roughed up people at a gay bar in New York called Stonewall, and the confrontation turns into a big protest in 1969. Okay, so Nixon gets elected. So his policy is going to be Vietnamization. Basically, Johnson's policy had been Americanization. You can't trust South Vietnamese to fight the war right. They don't really want to fight. They're scared of the Viet Cong. Feel like the Viet Cong are more dedicated to the cause than they are. So Johnson said, we got to turn this war over to the American Army. Well, the American Army can't get it done, no matter how well they do in battles, they're not making any headway. So Nixon says we're going to Vietnamize the war. We're going to turn it back over to South Vietnamese. All right, so if you look at the little line graph there, you see that Nixon takes off as the number of troops in Vietnam by 72. What's the fraction? 27 out of 480. So 30 out of, so it's like a fifth? 30 out of 500, basically maybe a fourth. So 75% decrease in the number of troops in Vietnam. So that kind of eases the protests. Nixon's fairly popular, and so what he wants is peace with honor, to gradually turn it over to the Vietnamese without us saying, well, hey, we lost. But imagine you're a soldier over there in Vietnam after it's clear that we're not trying to win. So they're upset. They're upset that college kids don't have to go. It's working class kids that got to go. There's racial tension between the troops early on in the war. African Americans got more dangerous duty. It wasn't that way as much by the end of the war because of protests, but still a lot of racial tension. And then got this thing fragging, where officers would go over there and they'd tell guys to go into harm's way, but they wouldn't put themselves in danger. So guys get so mad at their own officers, they throw out a hand grenade while the officers after the officer walks by, and the fragments would get them. So you got soldiers killing their own officer. So that's called fragging. Nixon makes the case that most folks are not war protesters, that his supporters call the silent majority. Trump talks about that. Some folks that are not out marching and carrying on and making a fuss. They go to work, they go to war if they get drafted. And so his argument is that the silent majority of Americans were still pro-war. So he bombs Cambodia. Cambodia is right next to Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia, and this thing, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that if we were in class, I'd be drawing it. Let's see if I can get us a Ho Chi Minh Trail picture right here. Alright, Ho Chi Minh. Yeah, let's click that, see what happens. Yeah, look at that. So take a look at that right there. Yeah, so look at this. So here's Vietnam. But the challenge was, like, the North would supply the South on the Cambodian side of the border. And so our soldiers wouldn't be able to shoot into Cambodia, even though they'd see the weapons being moved, because this is a neutral country. So he's going to bomb Cambodia. So we kind of understand why he's doing that. He's trying to stop the weapons from coming down. But, really unpopular that he does it. And so protests break out on the college campuses. 4 kids get killed at Kent State University in Ohio. Neil Young's got a song about it, 4 dead in Ohio. You might want to look it up. I'll try to send it to you. I think I'll send you some Springsteen. You can't go wrong with Springsteen here. The National Guard, that's the ROTC, that's the college kids, the reserve officer training cadets. They're going to go into the Army, but they're in college. And their job is to keep the protesters at Kent State under control, and, there's fussing and cussing going along. At any rate, they open fire, and they end up killing. So you almost have a civil war going on college campuses. You got the ROTC killing college kids. And so, all of a sudden, Nixon's really unpopular again. Okay, so I'll go down here. Hey, that's good stuff. I mean, that's all good. What caused the Cold War? That's a good one. Johnson and Nixon, all those things are good to do. Practice long essay questions. So take a look at those. Anything you want to send to me, turn into me. When it comes time to turn things in, depending on how long we're out, I got to look at this. All right, but let's see if we got some review. There's more. Hey, number 5 is really, really good. That's kind of the question about this period that we're kind of looking at. What caused the conservative backlash? All right, going to get the women's movement. Hey, haven't quite gotten there yet. All right, but there's the matching. Hey, I'm going to breathe for a second. Okay. All right, so this is number 2, I guess, huh? All right, let's call it a number 2. All right, and it might be number 1. It might be the first of I think the next chapter, the 70s chapter, starts with economics. All right, but let's pull it up here. All right, and so you got this thing called stagflation. Look at that word. It's a combination of 2 words, stagnant economy. If you got a stagnant economy, which, hey, maybe we're fixing to get, because nobody's going out and shopping. That's a recession. It's a stagnant economy. In a stagnant economy, unemployment goes up. Inflation, when prices go up. So you got this strange economy in the 1970s where prices going up at the same time unemployment's going up. Economists say that's not supposed to happen. Either unemployment or inflation goes up, not at the same time. But here's the reason. So the productivity, the 50s and 60s stop. You got all these teenagers, all these new folks entering the workforce that don't have a good education. Women and teenagers, they were like working, in service jobs and McDonald's and minimum wage. The government's not investing in much in factories anymore, like Europe and Japan especially is kind of catching up to us industrially. All right, and so those are the 2 reasons for the productivity gains. And then the reason for the inflation, hey, OPEC is raising oil prices, plus Johnson won't make a choice. The economists say we can spend money on the military. What is it? Or the what's happening here? Oh, I'm being joined. All right, one of your classmates is coming in with us. All right. All right, so the economy. Nope. Let's back it up. All right. economists tell us that you're not supposed to spend money on both the domestic economy and the military. You got to make a choice. It's called opportunity cost. If you spend more money here at home, that means less on the military. Spend more money on war stuff, that means less here at home. All right, but Johnson, he thinks he can do anything, so he spends money on both. So the symbol of that, the military is guns, the domestic stuff is butter. All right, so he spends money, so he's just spending lots and lots of money. Well, if money's flowing, price is going to go up. So that's how you're going to get that inflation going. We'll go back. All right. Okay. Okay. So here comes Nixon. So Nixon was actually a really good foreign policy president. Y'all may know that he ended up having to resign. So he's really controversial. He's pretty corrupt. But at the time he's going to get in trouble, he had been a successful president, especially foreign policy. Okay. So you have this thing. First thing he's going to do is going to go to China. Now that was a big deal because we hadn't recognized communist China. So there he is shaking hands with Mao Zedong. Remember when we talked about Mao? We said he never took a bath while he was dictator. So Nixon's making himself smile at him real nice and not say you smell bad or something like that. But he takes a trip to China. There he is at the Great Wall over there on the right. If you watched your Forrest Gump, and we'll take just a moment to remember Tom Hanks there. If you watch your Forrest Gump, he went and played ping pong in China. So first thing Nixon does, he does ping pong diplomacy. Just as countries that are trading with each other tend to get on, countries that play sports with each other, tend to not go to war. So first, he kind of paved the way by sending the American ping pong team over to China to play ping pong. But then he goes over there. And he hangs out for a little while, and this makes the Soviets mad. So time out just for a second. All right, so here's the story I tell about this little analogy, and it's about girl drama in high school. All right, so we got 3 girls, and maybe this doesn't go on anymore, but back in my day, when I was in school, sometimes we had girl drama where girls would talk, teenage girls would talk about each other. So you got these 2 girls, and it'd help if I had like dolls that I was holding in front of you. So I apologize there. So they don't like, they're always fussing and feuding and hating on each other and texting bad stuff about each other, blah blah blah. All right, well one of them gets tired of it. So one day she says, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to my enemy's pretty good friend, and all of a sudden I'm going to make nice with her." All right, that's going to make my enemy really, really nervous. So she goes to her and says, "Oh, I like your hair. Your hair looks so good today. Can I borrow your makeup? Oh, your person's so cute. Oh, just love that outfit." And so, the girls are making nice with each other that have never really paid much attention to each other. And so then the other enemy gets nervous. And the idea is, well, in a couple of weeks, the enemy's coming saying to the first enemy, "Well, I like your hair. I like your purse, yada, yada, yada." And then they don't really like each other. Then they turn to kind of like frenemies, but it eases the tension a little bit. For a few months, they don't post nasty things about each other or something like that. So this is what Nixon does. He goes to China, not because he cares all that much about China, but because he cares about easing tensions with the Soviets. So once he makes nice with China, all of a sudden, Brezhnev is the name of the new Soviet leader. Hey, Walt, say Brezhnev.
Brezhnev.
Hey, Walt's on there. All right, so Walt's right here. So he said Brezhnev. All right, and so Brezhnev invites Nixon to the Soviet Union. So they signed this treaty. It's the SALT Treaty. That's an acronym, and it stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. So for the first time during the Cold War, both countries are agreeing to a limit on how many nuclear weapons they're going to build. So, Nixon's saying, look, we almost blew up the world in Cuban Missile Crisis, and then we're stuck in this war that we hate. We got to do something. And so there's also an anti-ballistic missile treaty where they're not going to build stuff that'll shoot each other's missiles down. And so he's achieving this phrase called détente. Walt, say détente.
Détente.
All right, so everybody out there in watching video land, say détente. It's so it's like day, and then, I don't know, taunt. Taunt doesn't sound like anything. All right, but it's a French term, means easing of tensions. All right, Let's see. Julio could say it all French-like for us if he was in class. Okay. So, I mean, what he's done is they call it triangular diplomacy. He's sending his Secretary of State Kissinger, and he goes to China, then he goes to the Soviet Union, and so things kind of run in a triangle, all these little negotiations between China, Soviet Union, and the United States. So he's this master, like, strategic tactician, and so he does kind of ease tensions in the Cold War. So we're kind of stepping back from the brink of nuclear war that we had been in the 60s and 70s. So very successful. All right. He pulled, now the last, let's see. He pulls the last troops out of Vietnam in 1973. Now, the war wasn't over, so that was kind of, he's making his case that this is peace with honor. He's easing tension with the Soviets, with the Chinese, and South Vietnam hadn't fallen, and so we'll still send aid to South Vietnam, but you know they've got to fight the war themselves. All right, now when Ford becomes president, we're fast forwarding just a little bit. Saigon's going to fall. So I mean, Saigon's the capital of South Vietnam. South Vietnam only holds out another 2 years, and so we're pretty humiliated about it. You know, did we lose a war? Well, our side lost the war. So I mean, it's kind of a distinction without a difference. And people really that's when you start to see distrust of government. You know, distrust Johnson because he's talking about the body counts and swearing up and down that we're winning when we're not. And then Nixon, we're going to get into his kind of, dishonesty. And so, I mean, that begins, in the 50s, like 90% of Americans trusted the government to do the right thing most of the time. And today, pretty consistently, those percentages hover around 20%. So that's when this starts. Okay, let's take a look at the pictures. So this is like, that's the U.S. Embassy right there. So this helicopter's landing at the top of the U.S. Embassy. And people are so desperate to get out of Saigon when we're pulling out the last of our ambassadors that they can't land the helicopter on the ground, or else everybody will jump on it, and then so many people will be holding on to it that it won't be able to take off again. So they have to land it on the roof. Okay, and so that's the bottom picture here is a bus trying to head towards the embassy, and it's like the same deal. Everybody's so scared to death that the communists are going to come and hurt and kill lots and lots of people. They're all desperate to get on the bus, get in the embassy, get on a helicopter. So this American's having to punch this guy in the face to keep him off the bus so that the bus can leave. All right, so I mean, just really, really humiliating situation for the United States as we're pulling the last of our American officers out of Saigon, and as Saigon has fallen to Vietnam, and Vietnam to the north, and Vietnam is still a communist country to this day. So our side lost. Did we lose? Kind of, sort of, but our side lost. Okay. All right, so, hey, take a look at those. I'm going to take a breath. All right, okay. So, hey, let's call this one, what do you think, number 3? Let's call this one, so we're at Nixon at home. Okay. So, Nixon is he's an unexpected guy given what we know about him. Can I turn this into a 3? I think I can. Oh my goodness, I may not be able to. All right, so Walt's doing something here. He thinks he can do it. All right, so if it gets done, we're going to credit Walt with this. All right, and he didn't. He thinks he knows. Hey, I'm the master of the freaking computer screen. I know how this computer's. Look at that. Look at that. Look at that. It can't be done. Oh, wait. Oh, these young whippersnappers, they just think they know everything. All right. Officially, now, this is what happened. I figured this out, and Walt's over there cussing because he couldn't figure it out like the old man could. All right. Now, back to our story. So Nixon's this Republican, and so we're expecting him to be like Trump. Maybe he ain't. Domestic means at home, he's almost a liberal. He's almost center left a little bit. Almost like what we would expect Joe Biden to be if Biden gets elected president. I mean, dead center. He's right there with Teddy Roosevelt, right there with Bill Clinton. So he's a Republican that's getting elected. at this time that so many Democrats get elected, so kind of like Eisenhower in that sense. If Republican's going to get elected, he's got to be a centrist Republican. All right, when he becomes president, you have this very liberal court. A liberal court's called an activist court. Feels like the court should make a lot of policies and kind of change society. All right, now Brown versus Board, that had been in 1954. We know about that. And he's inheriting the Warren Court, the Earl Warren Court. Engel versus Vitale, that's 1962. That ended prayer in schools. All right, so a lot of, Southerners who might have voted Democrat, not going to be happy about that. That's going to kind of move the South towards the Republican Party for reasons other than race. It's ending school prayer. What happened was, like, the Supreme Court ruled that a school prayer puts pressure on little kids in an elementary school to pray. So let's say I'm having this prayer. All right, so they read this prayer over the intercom at this New York elementary school. It went something like, Father, we thank you for your blessings, and we acknowledge our dependence upon thee, and we ask you for your blessings on the school, the staff, the teachers, and the kids. Doesn't say Jesus, it's not a denominational prayer or anything like that. But somebody got upset and they sued. They said, and like the school system said, well, we tell little Johnny he can go outside, all right, every day when we say the prayer. But then by the third day, when little Johnny comes back in after the prayer, everybody's saying, well, look at Johnny, he's weird. There's that weird kid goes outside every day. So it's it's the government. It's a government-funded peer pressure on Johnny to pray. So that's why we don't have prayer in the morning. You don't have school prayer. So Supreme Court case 1962. All right, 63, Gideon versus Wainwright. This guy Clarence Earl Gideon, there he is right there. He got convicted of robbing a pool hall. It was like $70 worth of quarters. But he couldn't afford a lawyer, and so he didn't know what to do when he went on trial, and so he got convicted. So he starts studying up, and he finds out that for the, what is it? It's the Sixth Amendment. In the Sixth Amendment, remember, first day of school, we learned speedy trial. It also gives you the right to counsel. So he figures out that he's got the right to a lawyer, and so he takes his case to the Supreme Court. And from that case, the Supreme Court rules that anybody who doesn't have any money can have a lawyer appointed. You've seen it on the police shows. You got the right to remain silent. You got the right attorney. If you can't afford one will be appointed. Well, there's where that appointed attorney comes from. Turns out this guy, he wasn't guilty. Like when he has a retrial, the guy who testified against him, was the guy who done it. Okay, here we go. All right, Griswold versus Connecticut. So here we have, what the heck happened there? Oh, I accidentally, here we go. Where is Griswold? There she is. All right, so we think about Griswold if you know your vacation movies, the Griswold Family Christmas, so that's kind of how you can remember the name Griswold. But the Griswolds ran this thing called Planned Parenthood, still around today, pretty controversial. All right, so they had a birth control clinic, and they gave women advice about using birth control. Well, Connecticut was a pretty heavily Catholic state, had a law against birth control for like over 100 years. All right, so they know they're breaking the law. They're practicing civil disobedience, and they get themselves arrested, and their case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. All right, so the court rules that a couple has the right to use birth control. All right, so without getting into too many details that would trouble anyone on any level, there's no way that there's going to be any more McKenzie kids. That is impossible. All right, Dr. McKenzie, that's just too much information. I'm troubled. I apologize for that. All right, but it's our constitutional right to ensure that, because, hey, we've got the right to privacy. Implied by, like, the Ninth Amendment. Remember, the Ninth Amendment was power to the people to do anything that's not denied by the Constitution, by the law. All right, or anything that's not listed. Just because it's not listed doesn't mean you can't do it. So the right to privacy is based on like Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, Ninth Amendment, some other stuff. All right, but think about that. Raise your hand, and I'm watching you. All right, I'm watching. The good thing about being at home is I can actually see both classes at the same time. So you're all sitting in there. The class, we got like 50 people sitting in the same class at the same time. It's kind of squunched. All right, but I want to raise your hand if you agree with me that we've got a right to privacy. All right, so everybody raise their hand. All right, raise your hand if you disagree with me that there's a right to privacy. And like nobody raised their hand. I think a couple of you were lying, but you were like worrying about peer pressure, and there you were. Look. All right, so we all agree on that. All right, but here comes this new case. All right, and this was the Burger Court. Warren, he died in 1969, so Nixon appoints the Chief Justice Warren Burger. And so the abortion case is going to be Roe versus Wade. There's the lady in Texas. It was a Texas case. Texas had a law against abortion. So this lady, her name's Norma McCorvey, but she didn't want her name published so people wouldn't hate on her, so she went by Jane Roe. And the court ruled that she's got the right to an abortion because what's going on in her own body is her own private business. So the right to an abortion is based on that right to privacy. And since then, states haven't been able to outlaw abortion. Since Texas can't outlaw abortion, Georgia can't, nobody else. So it's been legal nationwide ever since then. And so even his court, although it starts to become a little more conservative, really kind of liberal. All right, so this is still, even though it's Nixon's, kind of a liberal time period, even though it's a Republican. All right, so we're going to kind of call him a liberal. All right, so let's see where we'll go right here. Let's go right here. And me and Walt will reenact the most inspirational moment from Remember of the Titans, where the two captains have agreed to finally stop working together and quit hating on each other. Okay, ready? Strong side. Oh my gosh, is he not here? What? Somebody needs to talk to his father. Strong side.
Weak side.
Strong side.
Weak side.
Strong side.
Weak side.
And so then they're all, now I remember. But I don't think it's called weak side. It's left side. Now, I don't know the logic of it, left side. But at any rate, that's the moment in Remember the Titans where they all come together. And so there's the Remember the Titans football team. But this is going on during the Nixon years. The schools get integrated by busing during the 1970s, even though Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. So, I mean, this inspirational civil rights movie is taking place when Nixon's president. All right, he's spending more government money. He's increased the amount of money that the government's spending for food stamps, for medical, Medicaid, that's medical care for the very poor, aid to welfare, aid to families with dependent children. So he doesn't cut programs. He expands this thing called affirmative action, which is encouraging colleges to admit minorities, women and minorities, employers to hire women and minorities. When y'all start filling out your college applications next year, there'll be a box for race and gender. This starts with Nixon. It was Johnson's idea. Johnson says, imagine two people in a race and one person starts out like 50 yards in front of the other one. They're going to win. So it's not fair just to tell the person that starts out behind to run fast. Now you're allowed to race. You got to take an affirmative action to help them catch up. But it becomes pretty controversial today. Some people call, we'll look at it with a court case. But some people call it reverse discrimination. All right, the environmental movement starts during the Nixon year. So there's Nixon in front of like a tie-dye shirt. There's a river in Cleveland that catches on fire. The Cuyahoga River. There it is right here. Well, if a river catches on fire, that means it's polluted. There's a lot of crap in that river. Cleveland is where Standard Oil had been. And then you have this lady, Rachel Carson, right here. She writes a book called Silent Springs. She says, if we keep dumping crap into the water, especially pesticides. When like we spray pesticides on crops, the way we sprayed Agent Orange on the Vietnamese jungle. Well, that poison gets into the water. The animals or the birds like drink the water, and then they all die. So one of these springs, the sun's going to come out. It's going to quit raining all the time. But you're going to go outside. It's going to be silent because there ain't no birds singing because we poisoned them all. So that book is really kind of the beginning of the environmental movement. So you got all this very, kind of the liberal stuff being completed under Nixon, rather than Nixon kind of being a backlash to it. And the backlash kind of comes with Reagan here in a chapter or so. All right. So it's politics. Now here's where his politics gets kind of nasty, and you start to see the nasty side of Nixon. All right. He's running for re-election in 1972. And he does what's called the Southern Strategy, and he's the master of euphemism. Euphemism is a nice way of saying, it's like polite terms for nasty things. So, like his favorite two phrases were law and order and busing. If you were in favor of law and order, that meant you hated civil rights and war protests, especially because they might get violent. All right, so people need to do what the heck the police tell them to do. More authoritarian. And then busing is kind of forced integration, like you're seeing in Remember the Titans. So the difference between desegregation, where desegregation says a school just won't prevent somebody from going there, and integration, where you're taking affirmative action to get members of different races sitting beside each other in the classroom. And forced busing was his language. So, I mean, even as the schools were integrating under Nixon, he's like speaking out against it in 72. This guy, Kevin Phillips, is the guy's name. He comes up with the Southern Strategy here. So speak coded language to the South. Don't use the N-word. Don't say, hey, I'm against civil rights. But if you say the right words, segregationist Southerners know what you mean, right? We know this, right? We know, I mean, Trump is a student of Nixon's euphemisms, right? So build the wall can just mean, well, we want to make sure everybody's obeying the law. It can mean other things too. So it's a euphemism. It can mean multiple things to multiple people. So that's kind of pioneered by Nixon in 72. Now, lots of Democrats have been doing it for years and years and years. Southern Democrats saying, hey, the African Americans, of course, they didn't say African Americans are going to take over unless you elect me to keep our segregation laws strong. So it's not a Republican thing, race-baiting demagogue politics, but Nixon's taking it to the presidential level. So he wins big. He won every state except for Massachusetts and Washington, D.C. The Democrats start using the primaries and the caucuses a lot in 1972. In response to angry young people from 1968. So that's where we kind of get our primary system, is the Democrats in 72, and that's kind of where you get this situation where the two parties tend to choose nominees that are either way too liberal for the general public or way too conservative. Starts right here in 1972 with the Democrats. All right. Kissinger, brings the Vietnam War to an end. We've already talked about it, but it happened in 73, so it's the second term. All right. And so, hey, let me take a breath, go back over that. All right. Whoops. Okay, so it's like number 3. We're not going to mess with it. It took us too long. All right. So it's like number 3. Okay. During Nixon's second term, Congress reached the conclusion, they say, well, we don't want to screw up with Vietnam again. So we feel like the presidency, not just one particular president, but the presidency has taken on too much power. So they passed this law called the War Powers Act that says if the president wants to send troops somewhere, he's got to tell Congress within 2 days, and if Congress doesn't give him permission to leave them there, he's got to get them back home within 2 months. So it's designed to give Congress more power over war making after Vietnam. Congress also ends the draft. We hadn't had a draft since Vietnam. Okay, so now the economy's going bad. OPEC is raising oil prices. they're doing it. These tend to be Middle Eastern countries. They don't like the fact that we support Israel. Israel won another war against Egypt in 1973. And so they're jacking up the oil prices. Okay. Let's see. Here's the thing that's going to get Nixon in trouble. All right. 1973. I don't remember. Walt, do you remember going to Washington? I don't remember what year we went to Washington. Well, McKinsey. All right, Walt remembers going to Washington. All right, so this is a very profound moment in the history of the McKinsey family. I'm hoping I won't get choked up when I tell this story, and you might get choked up there over when you're listening on the tape. All right, so be prepared to be moved by just how profound what I'm about to say is. So the Watergate is the thing that Nixon got in trouble for. And so when the McKinsey family went and took a vacation to Washington, D.C. when Walt was, how old were you?
About 4.
About 4 years old. All right, so we stayed in this hotel across the street from the Watergate Hotel. Watergate is a hotel in Washington, D.C. So they were all sitting there. I went to the window and I opened the window, moved the blind. I looked at the Watergate and I said to the McKinsey children, I said, "Hey kids, this is that Watergate. That's that hotel. You remember telling me about the Watergate?" See, hey, that was a little joke. So you expecting something like profound, and instead I just said nothing. So every year I build it up. Now, every year everybody just kind of looks at me, doesn't laugh. That's because they're haters. I know that deep down y'all were all laughing out there in Watch This Tape Land, because that was kind of a good joke. All right, all I said was that you were expecting profound. All I said was, it's the Watergate, that hotel thingy. Okay, so here's what Nixon did. The Democrat headquarters in 72 were at this hotel. And so guys working for the Committee to Re-elect the President. That's kind of funny. The acronym is CREEP, CREEP. The Committee to Re-elect the President break into this hotel, the headquarters, to dig up dirt on the Democrats. And that was a stupid thing to do because Nixon's winning big in 72. There was absolutely no need to cheat. But in the election, they cheated. They're digging up dirt on their political opponents. And they're breaking the law to do it. So, in some sense, we've seen this movie before. All right, so the Democrats are investigating him. And he says he doesn't have to. And he says, well, I didn't know anything about it. But the problem was Nixon taped every conversation he made while he was president. Presidents set up presidential libraries after they retire, so he's taping all the conversations so he can put them in the presidential library for historians to do research. But since he's taped everything, the Watergate Committee wants the tapes, and he doesn't want to do it. He says, well, there might be war secrets on there, and the Supreme Court said, bullcrap, you can keep anything about a war, but we need to hear anything having to do with Watergate. Alright, and it became clear that he was involved. He may not have ordered it. We're kind of not sure whether he ordered it. But all these guys were working for him, and he was involved in the cover-up, so he was about to be impeached and convicted not only by the Democrats. It wasn't going to be a partisan thing. It was a bipartisan thing. Republicans went to him and said, we're going to impeach you and convict you in the Senate. So he resigned. He gives a really, really great speech the day he resigns. Let's see. He quotes Teddy Roosevelt, and I think I forgot to. Let's get this one going. I forgot to quote Teddy Roosevelt when we covered him. Man in the Arena. All right, it's the Man in the Arena speech. So let's see if we can pull this sucker up. Really, really good. Maybe right here. Yeah, look at that. Everybody look at that. All right. Maybe I'll try to get everybody to memorize this or something. Or I think Dr. Johnson has it on his wall. It's really, really great. It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the great deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, great devotions, who spends himself in the worldly cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of achievement, who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory nor defeat. So, he's saying, hey, you got to try. You got to try to do right. What Harry Tubman say in that song? And I just might fail, but God knows I tried, sure as the stars fill up the sky. So, that's a really nice quote. This is Nate, great speech you made. But then there he is getting on the helicopter to leave, and he's throwing up the victory sign. That's not the peace sign. So that's this strange picture of Nixon throwing up the victory sign when he's the biggest presidential loser in history right there. And so that's the last of Nixon. So his vice president, Gerald Ford, takes over for him. Now, Ford pardoned Nixon. The president has the power to pardon. Means to convict somebody of a crime. To forgive somebody of a crime. So Nixon didn't have to go to jail. And Nixon getting Ford becomes controversial by pardoning Nixon, and that's going to hurt him for when he runs for election in 76. It's going to make Ford the only president to never be elected vice president or president, because Nixon's original vice president got in trouble too. All right, so we don't have much on Ford as president. He did sign this agreement on human rights in 1975, saying, countries shouldn't torture their people. But that kind of makes the Soviets mad because, the Soviets, the communists, tortured their people. They, you don't have freedom of the Soviet Union. So it kind of makes detente a little less cooled off. Starts to amp up the tension with the Soviets a little more. All right. Good gracious. So, it's a big old chapter, this 70s chapter. All right, so now you got the women's movement. So this is the real deal of women's movement. You call it second wave feminism. It's also called women's liberation. It's led by Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. So remember Betty Friedan, there she is marching. And she's kind of marching for equal pay. It's kind of spurred on by Roe versus Wade, the abortion case. Her book Feminine Mystique was written in 1962. It's about being boredom for housewives. But then, so the women's lib movement or the feminist movement of the early 70s, it's coming out of civil rights and the anti-war movement. Start naming civil rights leaders. They're all men. All right. And so women in the civil rights movement basically served as secretaries. And hey, Martin Luther King and a lot of these civil rights leaders were not really good husbands when they were out on the road. So sad story there. The anti-war movement. All right. Again, women are kind of secretaries. So let's say, what the heck did I do that for? I'm not that Southern. All right, let's see if we can pull up the most important scene in Forrest Gump. I'm not sure if we can, but we're going to try. All right, so it's the Black Panther Party. That's why I did it, because I knew I was fixing to talk like Forrest Gump. All right, so Forrest, look at that. All right, here we go. Alright, hey, close your ears if there's cussing. I apologize. Once again, we'll say think sad thoughts and send our best wishes to Tom Hanks. Alright, but so there's Jenny, and she's hanging out with our anti-war guy. He's from the SDS. That's the Student from Democratic Society. And it turns out that he's kind of a turd. Alright, so here we go.
Jenny and me was just like peas and carrots again. She showed me around and even introduced me to some of her new friends.
Shut that blonde man and get your white ass away from that window. Don't you know we in a war here?
Hey man, he's cool. He's one of us.
Let me tell you about us.
What the hell?
Our purpose here is to protect our black leaders from the racial onslaught of the pig who wishes to brutalize our black leaders, rape our women, and destroy our black communities.
Who's the baby killer?
This is my good friend I told you about. It's Forrest Gump. Forrest, this is Wesley. Wesley and I live together in Berkeley, and he's the president of the Berkeley chapter of SDS.
Let me tell you something else. We are here to offer protection and help for all those who need our help. Because we, the Black Panthers, are against the war in Vietnam. Yes, we are against any war where black soldiers are sent to the front line to die for a country that hates them. Yes, we are against any war where black soldiers go to fight and come to be brutalized and killed in their own communities as they sleep in their beds at night. Yes, we are against all these racist and imperial dog acts.
Oh, look out, here comes Far. Get him, baby.
I shouldn't have brought you here. I should have known it was just going to be some bullshit hassle.
He should not be hitting you, Jenny.
Come on, Forrest.
Alright, so, I mean, I really like that scene as an explanation of the women's movement. So, you know, the story, our story of women's political activism is always like fighting for somebody else, right? To start off with, you know, so women, you know, the Seneca Falls ladies, Stanton Anthony and Mott, they were abolitionists, and then the 15th Amendment leaves them out, and so they got upset. You know, they were upset about that. The women's movement's kind of coming out of, you know, the Jacksonian era where, you know, the common man, but not getting new rights, but not women. And so the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement didn't treat women as equals, so they've got their own movement now in the 70s. All right. And it's just kind of interesting. I mean, it's a little different from like Me Too, in the sense that you notice Gloria Steinem here is making a point of being a pretty lady, you know. So she's very different from Betty Friedan. So this is also going on during the sexual revolution in the 1970s. So I mean, I was looking forward to teaching this and like having a discussion of it in class, and you know, just like Vietnam. So that's frustrating, but that's the beginning of women. That's women's liberation of the 70s and like second wave feminism. Now, what's coming out of it? Well, you've got this organization now, National Organization of Women. Friedan's the leader of it. Title IX, to this law called Title IX, gets passed that says there needs to be equal funding for women's education. Well, here's like the biggest moment in women's sports. This is when the women won the World Cup in '96, I think. And first time the women were on PKs, you know, penalty kicks. All right, Walt, can you name that lady? Nobody can name, like the most famous lady on this team was named Mia Hamm, but this lady is named Brandy Chastain. So she wins the game, the soccer match, and the World Cup, and then she immediately pulls her shirt off, revealing like the sports bra, and that's like what all the guys had always done when they've got a big moment, you know. So she was on the cover not only of Sports Illustrated that week, but of Time magazine, and the articles were all about how spending for women's education in college had really improved sports programs. And really now, Me Too stuff today, part of the reason that, like on campus, there's a lot of, the administrations are real, like, strict about rape allegations because they're concerned about, or sexual misconduct allegations. It's a really controversial thing on campus. You know, the college administrators are worried about losing their Title IX funding. So, I mean, Title IX, just very, very relevant law today. All right. Now, you have this lady. Let's see. Can I just... There we go. All right. This lady, I like her name. Her name is Phyllis Schlafly. Phyllis Schlafly. All right, and so she's the leading critic of the women's movement, and she says it's going to ruin the family. And in fact, the divorce rate triples during the 1970s. So remember when we watched the film on the 50s, it said 97% of marriageable people were married. If you were marriageable age, you were basically married. And it's not that way anymore. And so the divorce rate's getting up to 50%, by the end of the 70s. And so her concern is that feminism's bad for the family, and you do see this impact on the family as women kind of reject their traditional domestic roles. So it's really, really culturally controversial. The way Me Too is pretty culturally controversial today. So an amendment to the Constitution was introduced called the Equal Rights Amendment for women. Can't discriminate based on gender. To amend the Constitution, you need 2/3 of Congress, which it got in 1972, but you need 3/4 of the states, and it only got 35 of the states. Southern states were against it at the time, ran out to ratify it, so it didn't ratify. So we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment for women. But the 70s is kind of the heyday of the feminist, second wave they call it, second wave feminist movement. All right, there's that divorce rate, and so you see it kind of really peaks at the end of the 70s, then starts to decline, and it's kind of leveled off. I don't like their percentages that they've got there. I'm not sure exactly how they're figuring that, but the divorce rate generally peaks at about 50% by the late 70s, and then today I think it's like low 40s or something like that, but it's lower than it was. Now also people getting married at a much later age, but so you got the peak of the divorce rate during the 70s there. Okay, you got these anti-busing demonstrations. Busing is when you bus minorities into a white neighborhood in order to integrate a school, or you bus white kids into a minority neighborhood in order to integrate school. A lot more controversial than just desegregating was. So here we have all these anti-busing demonstrations. So guess what city this is in? All right, so this is an anti-civil rights demonstration over busing. All right, I'll give you 5 guesses. So Walt's going to use his psychic powers. He's going to tell me what kids are saying. All right, the first guess he gets is...
Of where they are?
Yeah, what city? What city are they in? Hurry, because
Berkeley.
Berkeley. All right, no, that's not right. All right, but I like your thinking. All right, where else?
San Diego.
San Diego. All right, that's not right. I'll give you a hint. You want to leave. It's not in California.
What part of the United States?
Oh, that's getting too easy. Hurry.
Austin.
No, you're not really much closer. You got too much. Here. It's in the north. And it rhymes with Austin. Boston. It's in Boston. All right, so here you got these kind of working class anti-busing demonstrators, and this African-American lawyer kind of was walking to work, stumbled in the demonstration. So this guy is trying to stab him in the stomach with an American flag. And this guy's not holding him. He's trying to get him out of the way. But really kind of infamous anti-busing demonstrations. All right, you've got a court case against affirmative action. This guy, Bakke, was an astronaut, and he wants to go to medical school out in California. So I see what Walt's doing there. He saw Berkeley out there. He didn't get in, but his test scores and his grades were higher than the minorities who did get in. And so he says, well, this is reverse discrimination. And so the Supreme Court said that Berkeley's affirmative action program was unconstitutional because it says you got to have quotas, a certain number of minorities admitted to the school. Affirmative action itself isn't unconstitutional. The schools can use race as a factor, but it can't be a number system, a quota. All right, and then you have an American Indian movement that are occupying. There's a protest at Wounded Knee. Remember, that's where the last of the massacre was, and also Alcatraz, the prison in San Francisco about the treatment of American Indians. So you just got all these other groups getting involved in protests. All right, good long essay questions there. Number 4 is our money makers. Really kind of the question about this period here. What's causing this backlash? All right, so I don't know. Let me make a A few at some point, I might make a tape about it. But anyway, all right. I think Carter is the next chapter. Is the same chapter. I'm looking around to see if I see. I think this is the last section of this, so I'm going to go ahead and do Carter. All right. So here we go. So Carter's from Georgia. Maybe not. Let's stop it right there. All right. I think it's Carter and Reagan. I think it's a Carter-Reagan chapter. All right. I kind of like Nixon and all, because that's a lot of stuff, right? All right. So let's see what we got here. All right. The question is, can I remember how to do this?